finish up polling. Yes. Okay, 4.21, polling influence on policy. This is really kind of a repeat from earlier, but I want to emphasize one thing. All right, so polling influence on policy. Remember, policy is just the laws that we make and the rules that we create to govern society. Public opinion. This is a really important re-emphasis. It influences a given election or policy debate. So public opinion will influence a given election or policy debate. So people hear about a certain issue, they give an opinion on it in polling, and then that's going to influence the candidates and the election. For example, 2020, certainly you're going to be impacted by a pandemic, economy, and other issues like that are big issues, and the polling on those are going to influence the actions of the candidates. An example here: a majority of the public opposes, this is from a couple years ago, a substantial expansion of the U.S.-Mexican border. And you see it says 58% oppose substantially expanding the wall along the U.S. border with Mexico, and 40% are in favor. Notice that they use wall and not fence. And so that's interesting. So why would President Trump push so hard for the wall if almost 60% of people are against it? Well, that's why you got to look a little deeper in a poll. Look at this poll. Democrat support for a border wall slumps after Trump enters the presidential race. Support of building a U.S.-Mexican border wall or a fence. Notice that the red line, that's the Republicans. Notice that the increased amount of people who continually support it, and by 2016, it's over 70%. So Trump supports the border wall because Republicans support the border wall. So he has to keep his own base happy and maybe do something that in the general public isn't as popular. By the way, just take a note of the Democrat support. Do you notice? And this is where we talk about partisanship, where you support something, but then you find out the other guy that you really don't like from the other party likes it, so therefore you switch your position. This happens. This is called partisanship. Both sides do that. Most Republicans were for free trade and not tariffing other countries. Then Trump says, I'm for tariffing other countries, and suddenly Republicans are for tariffing. Democrats, now not in majority level, but a very large plurality, or a large minority of Democrats support a border wall, 45%-ish. And then Trump comes out and supports it, and suddenly it drops all the way to 11%. Like the support among Democrats just craters. Why? Trump. So this is just, we see this in politics all the time. You'll continue to see it in politics. I find it a little bit more refreshing of people who support something because they believe in it, not because whatever presidential candidate they like believes in it, and then they switch their mind suddenly. But I think most people don't really follow this stuff very closely, and so they identify, and political science shows this, people identify policies with the candidate they like, even though if they were actually honest, they're being inconsistent and switching their positions, between candidates. All right, so there we go. Let's continue. 4.22, the last card for polling reliability. 4.22, polling reliability. Well, after 2016, the idea was that polling was really bad, and it predicted that Hillary would win, and then Trump won. So polling must really, really stink. In reality, the story is a little different. Research shows even after the 2016 election, and it was surprised that Trump won, polls have been as reliable as ever. Polls are as reliable as ever. Now, how could that be? Well, there's two things here. One, the national polls predicted that Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote by 2%, 2 or 3%, about that range. And she did. She won that. So the national polls were correct. There's two reasons why people have the perception that polls were really off in 2016. One, a lot of polls in October, right before, weeks before the election, showed Hillary up 10%, 12%, 9%, 8%, whatever it was. It was only in the last 2 weeks that the margin of the election was really close. And so if you weren't paying really close attention to all the polls right up to the run of the election, then you would have thought Hillary was up by a lot, and then somehow Trump got within 2%. But actually the polling closed up really tight at the end. The second thing is that the state polling was wrong, or just hadn't been done. Hillary and the mainstream media, and maybe Republicans too, felt fairly confident that Hillary would win Michigan. And so there wasn't a lot of polling that was done, and the polling that was done was old, and it had showed Hillary up by a good number. So people just thought, well, then therefore Hillary's going to win Michigan. So no one even polled it. Hillary, I think, went to Michigan once or 0 times, I forget, but it wasn't many. And so that was the thing. Like Michigan was a surprise that it flipped to Trump. And then Pennsylvania was similar. There was quite a bit of polling there, but and some of it showed Trump really close, and within the margin of error. And when you're within the margin of error, that means it could go the other way. So it was that the state polling was a little more off because it wasn't as good. The samples weren't as big, and therefore not as accurate. So actually, in reality, polls are fairly reliable. There are problems, though. There are problems. Let's go through problems with polls on reliability. Why might you have some problems with polling? Well, one, fewer and fewer people respond to polls. Over time, less and less people want to sit down and give up 10 minutes of their time. First off, most people don't even answer their phone anymore. But they definitely don't answer it if they know it's a poll. So 10% of less actually will pick up the poll and answer it. If you go back to year 2000, it was 33%. So if you're calling around to try to find people to do polls, it's just a lot harder. I mean, 10 out of 100, that's tough, whereas you got to make 100 calls to get 10 people, whereas it used to be 33. You take 100 calls, you get 33 in 2000. So that's a problem. By the way, make the note that the most accurate polls are ones that mix cell and landlines, because if you ignore cell phones, then you're ignoring an entire section of the population who doesn't have a landline. Some of you might be sitting there thinking, Mr. Ingerson, what the heck is a landline? Yeah, exactly. That's my point. All right. Internet polling is very inaccurate because it's less random. Someone is choosing to go to a website. So, if a liberal website does a poll and it shows 85% believe X, well, that's nice. I mean, but that's not very accurate necessarily with what the rest of the population is. If Fox News does an internet poll, not a randomized telephone poll that they might do around the country, but they do an internet poll, and the Fox News audience skews Republican, then that's not very good poll. Like you got people that are already biased going to that website, so there's a bias to it. So internet polling is not accurate. Cell phones are making polling harder because it's harder to get results. Cell phones, people just don't answer their cell phone. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't very often. All right, so you call me and probably won't answer it. But I'll get back to you, but I probably won't answer it. Cool. All right, next. So therefore, polling firms are having to make more statistical adjustments to make it accurate. Like they didn't get enough of a certain demographic, so they have to make statistical adjustments. Now, what are statistical adjustments? What do we mean by that? It means they guess. All right, they make an educated guess about the percentage of people that are going to turn out that are Democrat or Republican or independent or whatever it may be. So they just make a little guess. Now, they have history of doing this, so they probably make pretty good guesses, but they can definitely guess wrong and have a poll be very inaccurate. And then lastly, it's always good to remember that a poll is only a snapshot in time. A poll in August that shows a candidate ahead is only a poll in August that shows a candidate ahead. There is a long history in American electoral history that shows a candidate winning big in August and then they lose in November. This happens all the time. I showed you the polls that were a year and a half before an election and just how inaccurate they were. I mean, don't you remember the President Mondale? Yeah, exactly. Or the George H.W. Bush's second term. Yeah, he didn't win one. He lost to Clinton. But all those polls, they're just a snapshot at that moment. And here's the thing: events happen, things happen, and when things happen, events change, and the politics change, and the polls change.